There, why this is coming on. Thank you for coming on to Bridges Live on the Apple Podcast, iHeart, iTunes, and all that great stuff on social media. Dr. Only, we started this Mental Health Mondays, and we love the sound and the ring of it because we believe it's so important. And we're going to have to continue it somehow. I know you're going to have to take a break here pretty quick in the next couple of weeks. Because you're starting a whole new venture thing, and that's just going to be great because we need to champion the thing on mental health, and that's just important. So, how's your week been? Catch us all up. We haven't seen you since Monday.
The week has been really good. Just busy trying, transitioning into this next project and into this next phase of life. Hanging out with family and some close friends, so it's been really good.
You're a new aunt, right?
I am.
And so, because black families do it, I'm going to have to do it. So, when is the time going to be for you? Are you going to put that life on pause where it's like, I'm not having, you know where this is going.
You're like channeling my mother right now.
You know exactly where this is going. So what are you doing? Like, what's up? What's up?
So I'm really big on God timing and allowing for that to kind of reveal itself. I'm open to, whatever God has for me, but I'm really big with not pushing anything, focusing on one thing at a time. This project is really big, so I'm kind of focused on it right now, but once the transition is complete, I'm just kind of open to whatever God has for me.
Okay, so being a guy and hearing words of God's timing, I'm going to give you the guy answer. God put me here in front of you, so the time has. So how do you
my follow-up question would be: so what is your understanding of God? What is your relationship with God? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So my relationship is I was praying and here I am. Bow. And I trust and believe I'm supposed to be here.
Is that right?
Right. Isn't that the hardest question for women and independent women, strong women, and women who want their lives to move forward? It is a God's time. All people it's God's time, and there's a belief and a trust and a faith and all of it. But they, what does James say? God without work is futile, right? Futile. So if the person is there in your life, isn't that the work?
It could be, but I think that it's also important to keep in mind that people are in your life for different reasons. There could be a perfectly wonderful individual who is there to be your friend. There might be a wonderful individual who's there to be a business partner.
You just threw me in the friend zone? Oh my God! You just threw.
It's really, really important.
Already, bam! He hit him with the friend zone. So he ducked and shipped and he ducked the friend punch. And they are very sincere. Because I think,
and then with that, so I'll say that I'm old school. So with that, there needs to be a courting process.
Okay.
You're willing to do the work.
So there's a time frame.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about. So I think we should go right into that God's time. I think if it's a time frame and it's X to Y, say it up front. That's what I mean, because you're right. If it's going to be the courting, if it's going to be a time frame, then let's just say it. There's like, you know what? I'm feeling it. This is great. I'm glad you're here. But you know what? There's a clock. And the clock started ticking X, and it's going to end in Y. And I think once both parties have that clock, I think we're all good. Except for the guys like, I think I waited too long, then that's not the right person for you, right? If anyone says, I think this is way too long, this is ridiculous, I've given you blah blah, I don't care. Because we've talked about it. I gave you the time. This is the time, and that's it.
Definitely. I do think that it's important to be flexible in that time. So it's helpful to always have a time frame in mind, but I do think that anything that's rigid can be kind of recipe for disaster. So
How so?
For me, I think generally within a 3-month frame, I know if I want to be with you or not.
Okay.
At the same time, it may be that we're separated by distance. So in that first 3 months, I haven't been able to learn you or been able to spend as much time with you or have enough experiences with you to make that discernment. And so while in my mind, I like the idea of a 3-month frame, depending on the circumstance or the situation, like Corona that we find ourselves in.
Right.
So that's what I always tell people, and what I tell myself is it's always helpful to have those ideas in your head of time periods, but to remain flexible based on the circumstances and the individual that you're seeing.
Because there was this, there was an old movie, and I cannot remember all the actors involved. It was called Dyer, and I think Steve Guttenberg was in it. But there was the 4 close friends. And one of the friends is getting married, and he's going to give her a quiz, and she's got to pass the quiz, otherwise they're not getting married. And his other friends, some of his friends were like, "Is he serious?" He's like, "You know how serious he is about his sports," and so he was dead serious about the quiz. He was, and they're like, "Oh, I have faith in her. She's been studying and all this other stuff." But I like that idea. I like the quiz. I like the time period. But here's the question I want to get into today, because I think when women and people have a time period, God's time, their work, their belief, there is also some paranoid action. How do someone weave that out and recognize, because paranoia isn't healthy no matter how you put it, right? So let's talk about what paranoia is. Let's answer that first.
So paranoia generally is having a kind of a high level of anxiety, where you start basing decisions and behaviors on things that may not be based in reality and maybe more based on your perception or your thoughts versus what's actually happening in front of you. So paranoia, a lot of times there's not a lot of evidence for the thoughts and the ideas that you have, but there are these beliefs that are based in anxiety and based in fear.
So now that someone has that, because when it's based in the reality, because your personal, so the throw I'm going to throw at you is, but if I'm thinking it is my reality, so then how is it paranoid? If I'm thinking it is my reality.
Definitely, it is your reality in the way that it's definitely the perspective from which you're living and experiencing your life. What I would encourage an individual to do is to ask themselves questions about what's the evidence for this belief, what's the evidence for this thought, or what's the evidence for what I'm seeing. Right. So I always use the situation, if a friend walks by you and doesn't say anything, and then automatically you get paranoid that you did something wrong, you're a bad friend, or they don't want to be your friend anymore, then I would ask you, what's the evidence for that? I don't know. They just walked by. What else could it mean that an individual walks by and didn't say anything to you? If you knew that their mother just passed yesterday and they were really close with their mom and they're so wrapped up in that grief that they didn't see you, would that change your perception of your interpretation of what's happened?
Yes.
And so those are the questions I would encourage someone to ask. What's the evidence behind it? Can I know for sure that this belief or this interpretation is accurate? If not, do some searching to get the information. So
one of the things, so even things are based on your perception, becomes your reality, right? And what you're really honing in on, and I want to say thank everyone for listening to Bridges Live on our Mental Health Mondays. You can also listen to this again on the YouTube channel, Dr. Paul Dyer Grandmaster, or you can go to the iHeart, Bridges Live, Apple iHeart, and all those wherever you listen to your podcast. So when you have a perception, it transfers over into your world, right? Now the information's up to you to discern, right? Is that what that's really what you're getting at, right? Discerning the information, not information, right? Because the information you have is very specific to the meaning you.
Yes.
That's where the development between paranoia and information and the anxiety peak, right? So how can someone recognize that I am anxious about the information and that can turn over to paranoia, but the information is still mine? So how would they do that?
So the main things I would recommend are doing things that get the thoughts and the emotions and the experience out of your head and onto a piece of paper. You can write it down.
I like that.
Just talk to someone that is a sounding board, where you're telling them that, and then they can ask you questions like, well, that doesn't really line up. But as long as it stays in your head, then it's going to remain real for you. Once you get it out of your head and you can look at it more objectively, once you talk to someone that you trust that can give it to you back more objectively, then that's how you start to see kind of where that anxiety is versus where the reality is. And when I say reality, I always discern between the big R and the little R.
Okay.
The small R is kind of your interpretation of reality, but you have to recognize that you create your own reality. There is a big R of what's really going on, and that's what we're always really trying to get to.
And and a lot of people put their personal R bigger than the other R, right?
Absolutely.
And then because I am the center of my own personal universe, so I revolve around my own R. So and my R stands above all things, because it's up to me, right?
Exactly.
That's not a life we can live in together.
It's not. It's a very ego-driven life.
Yeah,
where
huge.
Again, everything kind of revolves around you and your perception and your interpretation. And even when you get evidence that goes against what you believe, you still put your own beliefs on top of it. No, that's not true.
Yeah.
What I say is what it is. And so being able to step out of that ego and having the desire to see the whole big picture and the bigger picture is also going to be another important piece to it. It takes a certain level of maturity and insight.
Well, like most of the people know, and I'm wearing my beads. I'm a practicing Buddhist, and then one of the things that we practice, and when you said ego, is that we practice to remove that ego, because ego is so powerful. It's that thing that drives so many things away. Ego does never drive anything to. It literally drives everything away. And in the teachings and in the etheric teachings and in the education of selfless, ego has to be practiced against. There's not something where we're like, you know what, I think I'm going to stop being ego driven, and I stop and it's over. It's a daily breath. One of the things you say all the time is about your breath. Ego tries to take your breath because it stops you from breathing. Ego stops you from living in the present purposefully. So if you're not actively engaging your breath, your conscious mind, your subconscious mind together, ego is splitting all those things. It has you huffing and puffing. It has you living in just what you call, like you're not even processing. You're just going by habitual action because this is what's good for me, this is what I'm used to, this is what I like, and this is what I'm going to do. So that ego drives anxiety. Is that also possible too? Is that what you noticed?
I have noticed that. Ego anxiety is kind of controlled by what we call the monkey mind or the amygdala, which is very instinct-based.
Right.
It doesn't involve the higher order thinking of the prefrontal cortex. And so knowing that the ego also lives in that instinctual level of consciousness, there definitely is a correlation between anxiety and fear, unprocessed anxiety and fear, kind of that unchecked anxiety and fear, and the ego.
You know, we've talked before about that emotional mind, the ego mind, and the self, and you might, when you talked about that older part of the brain, the lower level part of the living, where it's just survival. It's just once ego comes in, we're just surviving. We're hunting, we're gathering, we're killing. We got a roof over our head. I'm going to live. I'm going to survive right now, and that's not living, because love is And that's a tough question, because when we were talking about God's time is a trust. And it has nothing to do with your ego.
It doesn't. And it also has nothing to do with your own timeline, too. And so as you keep these ideas of a timeline and quizzes and things in mind, you also have to recognize that there is a piece of surrender to whatever that larger power is calling you to do.
So is it can I want to help people, and I think when we talk about mental health Mondays, when we talk about mental health, we're talking about a lot of different facets that's always angling in on you, and you're not trying to deflect them all. You're trying to absorb and understand. Isn't that a difference?
Definitely, and I think with that perspective of trying to take it in and understand and slowing things down so you can have the time and opportunity and the energy to understand, that is when we start making that distinction between the ego and kind of that super ego, or the instinct, the ego instinct, and that consciousness that lives within you, that lives within us all. And so once we start slowing it down, getting things out of our head into paper, it allows that that calm, soothing voice, that still small voice, that super ego, whatever name you want to give to it, that God voice, to speak the truth to you. And that's really what we're all seeking, is truth that lives within us.
And it does live within you. And so, one of the things I know I suggested to people is when they do write it down, I'm not sure if you should read it right away. I think whether you pray on it, whether you meditate on it, but it's definitely got to be in a different time. And I know people keep journal. I know some people keep journals near their beds or in their room because they journal at night. I think if it's the journal is upstairs in that journal space, removing that journal to a different space. And the reason for that is because we create spaces that are filled with the energy of that space. So taking it out of that space and putting it to a different space allows you to be a different person in that space when you read that journal. What do you think of that idea?
I completely agree. It's definitely to bring kind of fresh eyes to it whenever you go back and read or re-experience, because that's really what we do when we read. We re-experience whatever it is we wrote. The idea of separating it and putting it in a separate room, I completely agree with. There's a different energy. You are literally a different person as you move from room to room. And then giving yourself that opportunity to see it from different perspectives at different times is really important.
And we have no problem saying mental health, and mental health is the wholeness of life. It's just a part, because you have your spiritual health, you have your physical health, and you have your emotional self, and we got that, we understand that. But when you are now absorbing and cultivating who you are with your spirituality, with your person that you're developing, there's a whole different movement to that.
Absolutely. And so I always let my clients know, or the people that I talk with know, that I hold the belief or the understanding that you're a spiritual being first, having a human experience.
Right.
And so unless you're connected with that larger part of you, which is that spiritual being, you're always working with a third deck of your cards. The larger part of you is in that spiritual realm, and if it's not connected, if you're not connected with it, then you're going to experience a disconnect in the physical world.
So when we go back to the anxiety, because that's part of one of our talks that we want to do today is the anxiety and then paranoia, because paranoia starts creating its own building. It starts developing its own little monster cave, like this isn't, and then you shouldn't, and it starts dictating. It doesn't even give you options. It just starts, paranoia dictates, right? And then once you feel yourself being dictated to, I think that's when you feel like that's the unhealthy relationship. That's it. If someone's dictating to you what you can and can't do, if it's another person, that's not cool. Paranoia, anxiety dictates.
Absolutely. And with that dictation, you forget all the options that you have. In your mind, the only option becomes what you've been dictated. And so your world is severely narrowed. You can't see the solutions. The only focus is on the problem and on that fear. And the interesting part is all that you're being dictated are ways to avoid the anxiety and what you believe is avoiding the anxiety. But in truth, it's really just revving it up. So when we think about just some of the ways that's manifesting in the world today with COVID, or with our kind of fear of police officers and of law enforcement in general, and our fear of the president.
Yeah.
A lot of times, these are.
Did you say 45? Did you say his name? Is he the boogeyman? Oh my God, you said his name, he conjured up the evil. Good Lord, oh no, oh my.
And I bring those up because all of these things, it makes complete sense why there would be some level of anxiety to it. But
Right.
at the point that turns to paranoia, where you start seeing the full picture, where you start having access to the solutions or to ways to calm yourself, or just that full picture of what COVID is and what the relationship between blacks and law enforcement is, then that's where we see that paranoia creep in. And then there's a kind of freezing response, because you can't access anything other than the fear.
You know, I know we before we stop the Mental Health Mondays, you and I don't know if I want to maybe touch on genetic processing of our personal behavior, because I still think people have not, because they're so used to the cultural base of doing things. It's what I'm when someone says to me, it's what I'm used to, I'm like, how did you get that? Like where did you learned it from? It doesn't matter what environment taught you. It doesn't matter what area of education taught you. You were taught, and you just did it over and over. So now it's not even you. It's not even a reflection of you. It's a reflection of someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times it's a reflection of a whole different time, because our cells and our biology do hold memory. So you have experiences within you, or memories within you, that come from generations before you were even born. And so some of the behaviors and some of the beliefs and some of the things that you exhibit are based on kind of that cellular level of memory, and not even things that you're fully conscious of.
And if you're not fully conscious of it, I think part of that, when we talk about absorbing and being aware of your thoughts and your emotions, and now understanding where that comes from, you can then ask yourself a question. Am I splitting hairs, Dr. Only? And to see if I'm right, asking yourself a question and questioning yourself. Do you think there's a significant difference, or am I just kind of like playing with words?
Well, I think that there is a difference. I think that when you're questioning yourself, there's kind of a sense of kind of a lack of identity or lack of understanding of the self that you're trying to grasp. Whereas when you're asking yourself a question, you become aware of something, and now you're making a conscious choice to either stay doing the same thing or to do something different.
And that's where I was, and that's exactly where I am mentally with all of it, because when you question yourself, there's a doubt thing going on. You're not sure where you want to pull an answer from. But if you just ask yourself a question, just ask it. Instead of like, because if you start questioning yourself, then you become the interrogator and the interrogatee. Mm-hmm. Someone's gonna win, and that's where ego comes, right? That ego's probably like, "Hey, let me ask a question." Right. Ego's like, "I got something.
I got something to say." Right. But when you take the time, when you become aware of something, and you take the time to ask yourself a certain question, in order for you to even know what question to ask, there has to be an awareness. So that, in and of itself, is a very clear process versus that doubtful process of questioning yourself.
So, I'm going to bring this back to the beginning of what you had said about your personal self, about God's time. To help people understand the factors or the process for people who also are in the space of, I'm moving forward, I'm aware, I have my belief, I have my faith, and I'm not letting anxiety or paranoia dictate to me what ego's doing. What's your next step for them to be like, how does that all push together in the same wagon?
So my next step would be to have a clear definition of what your wellness and what your well-being looks like. First for yourself as an individual, and then when you're in relationship with someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, or a significant other. But to first have a clear picture where you're writing out what it is that soothes you. You're writing out what it is that gets you up when you're down. When you're writing out what it is that, what your habits that you want to make sure you maintain are, your eating habits, exercise habits. So having a clear picture of what your wellness and well-being is as an individual, and then having a clear picture of what that looks like in relationships. And that also includes what healthy boundaries need to be set in those different relationships.
I was going to make a comical joke, but it's not all that funny. But, people look at the people like the Cardi B's of the world, or the Kanye's of the world, or whoever. They look out there and they're like, I would like to be ... And that's not a clear, healthy picture of you. That's a picture of someone, and whatever that is good for them. But I'm not sure if that is how you develop your picture.
Exactly. The only way to develop a picture is to take that time to self-reflect, to get to know yourself, get to know what your needs are. When things make you angry, recognize what the wants and what the need are in those situations. But it really is through that self-evaluation process that you're able to kind of discern what it is that you need versus what other people might be telling you need, but that's what works for them, but not necessarily for you.
I love the fact that we get, and I'm glad people are always emailing us or texting or commenting on the show, and how insightful you are, and how insightful the conversations we're having, because they don't normally look at it that way. And I think that's why we want to do these podcasts. That's why we do this, is to really educate, to inform, and hopefully brings people into an action. That's one of the three things I constantly want to do. I want to get great information so that you can develop an understanding of what we're talking about, and then you can develop an action, and then the process. The process are baby steps or small steps, or however you want to put it in metaphoric terms. But those three things, it's just listen, take it in, ask the question, and then move forward. I mean, what else can people do? Because this is all a work in progress.
Exactly, and recognize that it's a work in progress. And so, as you try things, some things won't work. It's not a point to shame yourself or to get upset with yourself, but it's to recognize that when you don't win, you learn. So you've learned something. Now you can do another action, and that might be the winning action for you.
It's Mental Health Mondays flies by. We like to stay on about 30 minutes. We don't like to beat anyone up and say, hey, But if you have any questions, always contact me. Contact Dr. Only. Reach out to us. Reach out to any healthcare professional to say, hey, let me get that checkup in. Start some of these processes. Start some of these exercises. Start some of these development stages for you, not for you to be something you used to. Is there anything you want to say before we pray out of here?
So just to kind of reiterate what you just said, make sure that if you feel overwhelmed at any moment, seek out your healthcare professional. It's always helpful to have supportive people in your system, but there is a benefit that a healthcare professional can give you, and you can always reach out to either one of us to help you navigate that system.
I love you, Dr. Only. You are just my little sister, just because I'm old man and you're not. You're a young woman. Let's bow our heads and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together on Mental Health Mondays. We like to say thank you for bringing us and bringing our hearts and our passion to the words to you. Let us know that we are here for your people. We are here to glorify your kingdom, and to let people know that they are not alone. They are never alone as long as they have you in their life, and they can reach out and they can be saved and be healed. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you, my dear, and I will see you Monday.
Sounds good. See you Monday.
Bye.